My name is John Prabhu. I'm Vice President Solutions Architect for SPi Global. We are basically a BPO, KPO provider, been in the business for 30 plus years. We have 18,000 employees. We work with various market segments, education, K-12, higher education, or trade sector, or STM market, retail information aggregation. So we do see a lot of content. And I'm saying very clearly content. I'm not referring to pages, chapters, title, books because content is the real major concept where everyone is trying to consume, and the model is shifting away so rapidly with the development of or evolution of all these technologies. So today's topic is more towards how do we take the content into more discoverable, more enrichment level, and how it's really adding value and what we need to do. Because each and every publisher has their own process or technologies or standards. There's no magic wand. But what we could do is how do we plan the content? How do you make sure that the content is prepped in such a way that with the implementation of any technologies, whether it's data analytics engine or adaptive learning or responsive design, or if you have any other CMSs, how this content can be really planned so that it can go into those various systems as seamless as possible. And that's the summary of today's topic. But just to give the context, how the digital evolution or technology has been changing or pushing us into this model. You can see the amount of population, almost 7 billion worldwide population, but almost 6.5 billion people are possibly mobile subscribers. So the level of consumption is so huge. And when we say consumption, it's not just static content. It is not plain text. There's so much visual content, so much social media, so much audios and videos, and interactive elements is also integrated within the definition called content. And when I say content, it's a combination of text, audios, videos, newsletters, articles, and which means if you just look back, almost this is every minute in the internet, the level of interaction that happens globally, how many videos are getting posted, how many people are accessing the content is huge. And that's why the definition of content itself is changing. People used to say content is just textbooks, or people used to say content is as long as it's current, as long as it's serving the customer, as long as it's not too short or too long. That is my definition of content. But the way that we think is that content is just a good content, but it's not a smart content. And why? Because all those content are scattered. If you go to any environment, any publisher, any client, every content is stored in different repositories, is using different markup. They're not all unified. They don't have a unified process of using metadata standards or even a markup standard. And they have almost multiple 30, 40 different products, and each of these products are working so independently. So when someone is searching for a particular asset, let's say it's a life of the Pi, but what they're truly getting is not exactly what they're meant to. They're probably getting a different version of it. Why? Because they have the same metadata term, but it's accessing in a different system, and they don't have the same asset. So discoverability is definitely becoming a major problem, and it's been incorrectly used and it's been inconsistently used. And that's why the level of data and concept planning is so critical. And so what do we really call smart content? Smart content is basically you have to think about at a topic level, at a very high level, where, for example, the different genres that you may have, whether it's humanities or social studies or fiction or non-fiction, that's probably at a high level, and that's what people are all doing at that high level. But what we really need to look at is at a contextual level. When you look at articles, when you look at the pages, what kind of learning objects are you learning? What kind of story are you really learning? Are we doing that granular level of tagging so that people, when they're navigating to that section, the product can give them suggested readings or suggested material for that story. So I'm talking about that granular level chunk. And also enable personalization. I'm sure a lot of authors, everyone is there, but also people are doing self-publishing, personalized authoring with the combination of social media. Imagine in a social media, people are just creating a text. It becomes a content that's been authored. But imagine that's the same way how we integrate that platform or how we integrate that content into your textbook material or integrate that information into your trade content. So personal authoring, personalization is going to be another key area. And finally is all how do we measure the outcome? It doesn't matter whether you give them books, but if you're not able to measure whether the student or the learner is able to reading the material, what level they're reading, where they're not interested in navigating away, which means you have to structure your content at that semantic level, which means that can enable your platform, that can enable your tools to really measure. So these are the high-level concept, what we say is smart content. And how do you envision smart content? Obviously, 10 years before, people will have unstructured data, and then people say, let's digitize it into some format of digital format. People used to say PDF is my digital, but that's a flat file. That's almost like a book and unstructured data. Then people said XML, that's great. But that is still not smart content. That's probably the good content. The smart content is really giving some meaning to it and giving some outcome from that particular content. That's what we are hearing from the clients. That's the problem space that our clients have been trying to solve, and that's the crux of the whole game. So how do we plan it? There's multiple levels. It's a combination of technology, it's a combination of metadata, it's a combination of semantics, and it's also a combination of design. You cannot separate one or the other. It is a combination of all those things to work together, more of a holistic approach. So if you look at metadata, is my metadata, are you talking about a title level or at a granular level? Do we have those metadata associated across the products? Do we have the metadata associated from textbooks to audios and videos and various other assets information? And do we have different levels of taxonomy from primary, secondary, tertiary? What level of taxonomy are you preparing? And then if you look at architecture, again, we talked about semantics, but besides that, what are those content? Are those content sitting in one repository or multiple repositories? Do we have all this integration? I'm not sure if some of the folks might be familiar with LTI, LIS integration, but how are you integrating your content? And is the content can be seamlessly visible to the end customer, even though behind the scene it might be different systems? And from design, obviously, there are multiple screens. So is your design is static or your design is more responsive? So you can work on multiple screen sizes. So you have to think about holistically from metadata to content structure to design. A lot of times we have seen people will produce a product, but it's very hard-coded. You have data and design hard-coded in the title itself, like a fixed layout, or even the style sheet is all embedded. But you have to think about separating those layers. We call more of a baskets or layers, so that today we have Apple 6 is going to come up with some different screen sizes. Tomorrow we do not know what screen sizes we're going to get, or we might have flexible screen sizes itself. So we need to make sure that at the granular level, the metadata and the technology and the design, are we doing that? And that's where it's more of a concept planning, I call. And a lot of times people produce the data, but then later they get into the crux, they have to redevelop it again. So what SPi is really helping the client is step back, look at the problem, what are we trying to solve, what kind of content that you have, what format of content do you have, what granularity level that you have, and is your metadata and your design is all integrated right now, and what type of authoring systems also you have in place. So we look at more holistic approach and plan the content and help the client. And this is some of the case studies I want to share. We're working with one of the information aggregator. They produce a lot of books, but they have questions and answers. The students are really struggling not reading the book, but really struggling how to get good grades. So what we do is we look at the question, and we have SMEs who look at the information and develop really homework solution, almost 5-10 pages of detailed step-by-step. And so these are the additional content that is available that we write on top of the books, but we have to tag it at each and every learning object, if I want to call, and able to produce that information. Now the student is able to access textbook, but they also have access to this additional information. And it's all sitting in two different layers, not embedded or not coded or hard-coded within the textbook. And here is another example for an STM industry where they have articles. It's like you have DNA compound levels, but it's all just picture-oriented, it's all text-oriented. What we're trying to do is when the manuscripting production is going on, simultaneously we're tagging all the metadata, and we're capturing each and every DNA level into using softwares like JChem or ChemDraw, giving a visual representation of it and and coding into some level of XML tagging. So when the manuscripting is done, PDF XML is done, then we have this additional content enrichment layer merged together. So in the platform, online platform, they can turn on, turn off the various index terms. They can turn on if they want a visual representation of those entire rich media layer. That's the level of smart content that we're able to produce. So now we have better engagement. Otherwise, a student or a learner is just going to have a flat text file, which probably they can even read it in a PDF file, or they can read it even in a hard copy book. So it's basically making sure that we can plan this architecture, and making sure the design and the tagging level is at that level, and then pushing back into the system, pushing back into the CMS. So all these additional layers are sitting in one repository, or even if it's two different databases, but it's all connected to the same metadata. So bottom line is, again, the concept is, if you don't think about pages or chapters, think about text and images and audios and videos. If you tag it at that granular level, you can then mix and match whatever design that you use. It could be a different design for humanities or social studies or fiction or non-fiction, but it's using the same content structure and schema, but different designs that you have. And then from that different design, you can customize it. So I look at, and here is a quote from John Doman, we are not publishing pages anymore. We are basically publishing content. And that can be achieved only when you construct or deconstruct the content at the granular level. And that's the only way where you will have your flexibility in the process, because we have been in the business for 30 years, and we are seeing too many changes. The only way we can prep ourselves is, are we ready for the next digital wave in the next 6 months or 12 months? And how do we plan ourselves to make sure that our production process, the content that we're providing to a client, is at that flexibility level? And finally, just want to end that with that note. This is making sure, because the technology is evolving, are we able to give the content what people want, in whatever format they want? Because I'm sure people are familiar with EPUB 2 and EPUB 3. There's other standards like DocBook and NLM standards and our IMS QTA standards for learning content. But are we producing those content at that level so people can exchange, interchange in various screen sizes? And also in whatever format. We don't care whether it's an app or a web or putting into an IR series and student series. We want to make sure that the content is discoverable, searchable. We are talking about a product level. We are not talking about print or digital. And in order to do that, it's more of granularity of the content, and content planning is the key. That's the end of my presentation. I'll be happy to take if there is any questions. Okay. I know it's the end of the day, so thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming in.